We've touched on some of this already, and we're going to think in more detail now. Considering all we have covered regarding trauma, bereavement and loss, when children return to school in September, they may have difficulty in the following areas. They may find it hard to remember school and class rules and systems, or take longer to learn new ones, for example if they're starting a new school, or even just moving to a new class. They may find it hard to know what information to focus their attention on, particularly if they're preoccupied thinking about trauma, bereavement or loss, or maybe if they're just missing their family and they're on their mind. Some children are going to struggle to sustain their concentration and complete a task. And we know that there's going to be gaps in the knowledge and skills of children, and this will vary not only between schools and individual classes, but within small groups as well. Some children may be hyper alert. If they've experienced a trauma or bereavement, then they might find it hard to filter out what they hear and see, and they may pay too much attention to things you're probably filtering out and not noticing, such as sounds in the corridors or an aeroplane flying over. And this can lead to them presenting as restless and that sense of being on edge. And then they may have difficulty because they're missing instructions, but they won't necessarily tell you this. Because of the chemicals that are released into children's brains, if they've experienced trauma and loss, then they're going to struggle to understand and use verbal and non-verbal language. And this will impact on their ability to form new relationships with adults and peers. There may be difficulty regulating emotions, so what we talked about earlier about reacting because we feel that there's a threat. So they're not necessarily going to think before they act. Some children are going to find it hard to use their memory to recall information, particularly if they're put on the spot and asked in front of other children to give an answer. Again, because of all those chemicals that may have been released if a child's experienced a trauma or bereavement, then we may see difficulty with executive functioning. So setting goals, developing a plan, carrying out tasks, reflecting on learning, and just generally being organised. And for children who already struggle with that, this will have been compounded. There may be difficulties with sequencing and logic, which could affect writing skills or relating consequences to actions. So knowing that if one thing happens, that something else will result, and being able to understand that and predict it. There may be difficulty with critical thinking, so understanding what's caused somebody to respond in a certain way in social situations, or just in general problem solving, whether it's socially or with a learning task. Lots of children are going to struggle settling in when they return to school in September, and some may find it hard to establish trusting relationships again. They may be worried about what's going to happen next, and find it hard to accept why adults can't answer this question. It's important to recognise that for children with special educational needs, many of the issues listed will be compounded, especially if the child has any difficulties with sensory processing, cognitive skills, or speech, language and communication. The vast range of experiences that children and young people have had during lockdown is a challenge in itself, and planning to provide extra academic as well as pastoral support will be needed. Some children will need additional tuition to boost gaps in their knowledge and skills, whilst for others, learning will need to wait whilst their overwhelming emotional needs are addressed.